Right, I'm not quite sure how long this particular paper will take, though I experiment a little bit. So I'm going to assume that you have seen this film, and I hope that from the discussion too, even if you haven't, you can gather the main lines of the rather extraordinary plot. And if we have time at the very end, thanks to Bob, actually, we have some clips that we could look at, but I'm worried about time considerations, so I think we'll just go ahead and give the talk, and we'll see what we've got. Now, the handout, all that is, they are some quotes from various of the characters in the film, and it's easier for you, I think, to be able to take a look at some of the incredible things they're saying there, but also when I come to the relevant part of the paper, I'll probably kind of skip over. I'll just make references to the particular quotes, so the short paper will be able to make those references. So, in the Coen brothers movie, The Man Who Wasn't There, there are flying saucers cruising the night skies over Santa Rosa. Or are there? Or is it rather that there are flying saucers cruising around in the mind of the protagonist and voiceover narrator, Ed Crane? Well, wherever we think the saucers figure in the world of the film, there's surely a question about what they're doing there in the first place. What function do these science fiction images and narrative fragments serve in the movie anyway? This space invasion motif is liable to seem silly and even incoherent. Most reviewers just ignore it. The story of Man Who Wasn't There is predominantly a noir-style tale of a downtrodden and doomed barber who commits a murder for which his wife is wrongly blamed, and who is himself subsequently convicted of another murder of which he's innocent. The Coens were influenced in making the movie by the novels of James M. Cain, and there are broad similarities to the twists and ironies of Double Indemnity and The Postman Always Rings Twice. Like the film versions of these novels and many other noirs of the period, the protagonist of Man Who Wasn't There provides a retrospective voice-over commentary on the dramatic action, a commentary in which he attempts to make some sense of the ill-fated incidents in his life. Of course, this is a narrative that spoofs the labyrinthine plots of the noirs it emulates, and the barber's voiceover parodies the gloomy, deterministic philosophizing that is characteristic of the voiceover narration in many similar films. Still, the objective of spoof and parody don't do much to explain why aliens from outer space should enter into the Enterprise at all. A prototypical storyline in a 1950s space invasion movie has the following rough structure. The aliens arrive in a small community, and a human protagonist comes to know that an invasion of Earth has occurred. The protagonist learns that the aliens are gradually taking over the community by occupying or otherwise gaining control of the bodies of the community's human members. The realization that the protagonist and his allies must face is that the familiar human figures that have been their friends and relations may be currently housing the malevolent minds of unearthly creatures bent on conquest. The film viewer's knowledge of the dangerous situation is closely tied to the unfolding experiences of the protagonist, and the viewer is expected to identify sympathetically with this character and his plight. The humanity of the protagonist and other members of the community is vulnerable to attack, and their shared humanity is a supremely valued attribute under threat from the invasion. Correlatively, the anguish of the protagonist in the face of the threat is the emotion that does most to bind the audience to him in his struggle against the creatures from outer space. Ed Crane is the protagonist in Man Who Wasn't There, and throughout the film, the narrative action is depicted and commented upon from his idiosyncratic perspective. Moreover, he is the character who makes the discovery that aliens have arrived in the vicinity of Santa Rosa. Beyond this, however, Ed is scarcely the sturdy hero familiar from the space invasion melodramas. First, the local incursion of extraterrestrial visitors is not a development that Ed views with either alarm or fear. On the contrary, at the end of the movie, his belief in their presence and his expectation that they will carry him away appear to be sources of hope and comfort to him. Second, Ed is presented from the outset as a distinctly alien sensibility within the human community. It's a commonplace of film law from the 40s and 50s that their protagonists are seriously, in some sense, alienated either from their emotional lives or from the social context in which they live. But The Man Who Wasn't There introduces the striking conceit that the protagonist could be an alien himself, or in any event has a psychological profile more fitting for an extraterrestrial. Some aspects of his alienation, Ed's alienation, constitute pretty familiar fare in traditional noir narratives. Ed is a man who is estranged from his life in 40 Santa Rosa. He's stifled by his job as a second-string barber, emotionally and sexually paralyzed in his marriage to his wife Doris, and distant from his self-absorbed, manipulative acquaintances. Although Ed's estrangement and isolation is extreme, even by the usual standards of noir plotting, these facts about his circumstances still fail to capture the thoroughgoing oddness, the patent creepiness of the Ed Crane character. The creepiness resides chiefly in his actions and demeanor. The character moves through his life as if he were under some kind of emotional anesthesia. When another person expresses a genuine, recognizable emotion, anger, distress, or fear, for instance, Ed seems to have only a glimmer of comprehension of the feeling that's been elicited. Similarly, the mechanisms that should register whatever emotions he might experience appear to have been massively short-circuited. He views the world with a blank and passive stare, often acknowledging the most outrageous occurrences in the story with a characteristic enigmatic nod of his head. Most notably, the man is preternaturally terse. Me, I don't talk much, he says at the beginning of the film. I just cut hair. Instead of speaking, he mostly smokes. Ed doesn't like the talk of other people much either. He's mystified and often distressed by all the elaborate verbal baloney to which he is regularly subjected. This is the important subject of the movie, and we'll explore it in some way. So the protagonist of the film has a capacity for emotional response that is functionally equivalent to that of a being from another galaxy. By rendering him in this way, the film reverses a fundamental strategy of the kind of space invasion movies that I sketched before. If Ed Crane were replaced by a pod duplicate, it's not immediately obvious just what difference a replacement would affect. It's no wonder that at the end of the movie he seems to welcome the presence of the visitors from outer space. Now again, it's not clear whether alien intruders have really arrived in the Sonoma Valley, but Ed undoubtedly supposes that they have. The idea is planted in his mind when Big Dave's wife tells him that she and her husband had been captured and released by creatures in a flying saucer during a camping trip outside of Eugene, Oregon. She believes that Big Dave has been fundamentally transformed by the spaceman during the encounter. Her testimony and manner is so hysterical and bizarre that Ed himself is puzzled by it. But the idea of a local invasion by extraterrestrials has been broached pretty emphatically here. Later, Ed glances at an article in Life magazine concerning the mysterious events at Roswell, New Mexico, though he evinces no reaction to the story. By the end of the movie, there's a scene that shows a flying saucer hovering over the prison in which Ed is incarcerated, but it may well be that this scene merely reflects a